and feel, okay? Let me show you other references in the Bible. This is very important. If you want to spend the week studying it, you can. But these are other references in the Bible that speak against us worshiping anything but God. Bowing down, praying, giving homage to anything but God. Now, the question becomes does this mean that God is against art? What do you think? Does that mean God's against art? No, God's not against art. Think about the Solomon's temple. Think about how beautifully constructed Solomon's temple was in the Old Testament. We learned a couple of months ago that like the outside walls of the temple, even the inside walls of the temple were, they etched in palm leaves. They etched in open flowers. And why do they do that? Does everybody remember? Because the idea was that when you went into the temple, it was as if you were walking into the Garden of Eden. Very good. Some of you remember that, okay? Now, God is pro-art. How do we know that? There's not one snowflake. There's no two snowflakes that are alike. God even made the snowflakes separate. And not just the snowflakes, what about us? What does the Psalm 139 say about the way God created us? That we are fearfully and wonderfully made by God. He knit us together in our mother's womb. But I want to show you something very interesting that King Solomon says upon the completion of the glorious temple of God in the Old Testament. Look what he says in 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 27. This is at the end. After everybody's celebrated and now everybody's gone home. He says this to God. But will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heaven cannot contain you, much less this temple I have built. Listen to what Solomon is saying. He's saying, this temple is glorious. This temple is beautiful. But this temple cannot contain the all-glorious God. The earth can't contain the all-glorious God. Not even heaven can contain all the glory of God. So guess what Solomon was teaching us? He was teaching us through this passage, don't worship the temple of God. Instead, worship the God of the temple. Amen? Let me say that again. Don't worship the temple of God. Instead, worship the God of the temple. Do you realize that this is the exact same thing Jesus told the woman at the well in John chapter 4? Look at what Jesus said in John 4. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. I love that phrase, must worship. In other words, Jesus is giving us specific instructions on how we are to worship God. In other words, we're not free to worship God however we feel to worship God. But we must worship God in the way that God has instructed us to worship him. Now, Jesus has a fascinating conversation